We're just going to continue with the matrix inverses lesson today. So if you have your notes, I'm going to get going on that. Yesterday, you had the opportunity to watch and listen and go through some things, but just to slow it down and give you opportunity to ask questions, grab a calculator. I want to make sure that you can calculate an inverse matrix. All right? So it's completely calculator work. Yesterday, I was trying to make the point that you can manually, by row operation, a matrix inverse, but it's a long, difficult process, and the calculator can do it for you, so I want to just make sure everybody's able to do that. This kind of backtracks over what we did, but I think it's worth doing again, and especially mouse, the thing's jumping all over the place with the little thing here. So the matrix button is the inverse of the X inverse button. So if you push second and matrix, it gives you access to the matrix section. So let's do that all together. And in order to find the inverse, you have to edit and you have to put the matrix, the original matrix, in. So if I want to find the inverse of matrix A, I need to put it in. So I'm going to edit matrix A. And it is a what by what matrix? 3 by 3. So you want to put in the dimensions first. It's a 3 by 3 matrix. So we've got 3 columns and 3 rows here, like this. So after you make sure you're doing it right along with, you need to put all in the matrix spots. Do that. 0's already there. Put in a 1. Just takes a minute. And mine makes me tap twice. When you do the negative, make sure you use the negative, not the minus button. I'm going through. And the 0 and the 0 are already here. So in order to find the matrix, then, everybody have it loaded in almost. I'll wait for a second. And if you just want to see that matrix, just to know what it looks like, you can always just go back into matrix to access any of the matrices. It's always that second of X inverse. And if you just want to see it, you can hit enter and just see the matrix. There it is, and that's a good way to just see it. But if you want to find its inverse, okay, you need to pick that matrix. So we're going to pick that matrix, A, and instead of hitting enter right away, you're going to hit the inverse button right here. So we have A, and that -1 is an inverse button. So it doesn't always mean 1 over when you do with matrices, it means the inverse. And what we have here is the inverse. It does kind of ooze off the end of the screen, but in order to fix that, you can use your MathFrak button, as was pointed out yesterday. And so you have the numbers here. If you need to I don't see the math button, and then the fraction button, and hit enter. Now the only thing that's a little bit difficult here is you've got this -1 something over here, so it's difficult to see on there. So you could always go back and look at it just normal. You could, yeah, you can click the right arrow, and the right arrow will help you to find it. Left arrow brings you back, right arrow keeps you going over to that. And then you've got your numbers, and you could just write the inverse down after you see it. 1, 0, negative 1/3. This whole thing here with the row operations, no. You can just do it in the calculator. I just wanted you to have seen, at some point, I wanted you to have seen the row operations. We did row operations already.
Even in quiz and test, we don't have to do it ourselves. We can just do it.
You can find the inverse with the calculator. You do still have to know a little bit about row operations like we did on the quiz. But not the crazy ones, not the ones that are 3 by 3, only for like if you did a bonus question. Just 2 by 3s, just 2 by 3s for the row operations for actually having to show the solving. But this thing, since we had the discussion about row operations, you know that they exist. I went through it very quickly in yesterday's lesson. But if you can just do this and find an inverse, and then we know that A inverse is this right here from our matrix we got, 0, 0, 1/3. And the second row, negative 1/2, negative 1/2. We can go over a little bit to find the 1/2. And then the 1, 0, negative 1/3, and you can just write down the inverse from the calculator. And so that's kind of neat. We have just a little bit more to go on this. I wanted to show you also. Now right here for row operations, we find out that sometimes there is no inverse. And if we remember a little bit about row operations, negative 2 times R2 plus R1 would be where you start. And we find out that there's no inverse, but we could also use our calculator to find out that there's no inverse. So let's put in a new matrix. We want to put in this A for our matrix. So let's alter that. It's a how many by how many matrix? 2 by 2. So go to Edit. And we know that it's a 2 by 2, so we're changing the dimensions. And then we have to go in and enter our numbers 2, negative 4, 1, and negative 2. And we're trying to find the inverse, so let's see what happens when we put in finding the inverse. We'll go back out to the main screen, and we're going to choose matrix A. Matrix A. That's where it lives. I'm going to push our inverse button. Oops, nope, I pushed the squared button by mistake. Inverse button right there. And when we hit enter, it says that we have an error. It's a singular, it says, but singular matrix. So in other words, meaning that there's no solution. We could hit quit or go to. And the problem right here, it's just going to go to that error. We try it again, and it's still, it's an error. So that error tells us that there's just no, there is no inverse to that particular matrix. Okay, so some matrices have inverses, some do not. And the point to a matrix is when you multiply a matrix times its inverse, you get the identity matrix. And at the beginning of the lesson yesterday, we talked about the identity matrix. And what do you remember about the identity matrix from yesterday? What's that look like? Okay, so let me just jog your memory a little bit. For a 2 by 2 identity matrix, 2 by 2 identity matrix would be 1, 0, 0, 1. Okay, this is the identity matrix for a 2 by 2. A 3 by 3 identity matrix would have, okay, good. and then 0, 1, 0. So it's just putting ones on the diagonals. So identity matrices like that, it's kind of like when you have two numbers multiplied together and it gives you a 1. So you've got a number and its inverse. There's an inverse for matrices too, that when you multiply them together, it will give you these identity matrices. So that's the purpose of these. So how does that help us? That helps us so that when we have a problem to do, such as this, we can solve it using our inverse matrix idea. So you can load up a matrix from a system of equations. We had done it as an augmented matrix before, but you have another option. And your other option is to take the coefficients. Okay, now this you do need to know how to do. You do need to write this down. You do need to pay attention. So those that are not paying attention right now, let's get going. Let's make sure that you're paying attention so that if I ask you to do this on your test, your quiz, you can write down this part because this is important. So the coefficients right here go with the numbers for the x and y. It does have to be in standard form. We have our x, y here, and when we really think about this, if we think about matrix multiplication, you would be taking these two and multiplying them down through here, and it would give you this. And on the other side, for equals, it equals the matrix 4, 2. So in order to solve this, in order to make this work out so you get an x equals and a y equals, you need to multiply both sides by the inverse of a. Now, our shortcut to this is that we don't even have to necessarily write down what the inverse of a is if I just write it in this fashion. So here's this problem we were dealing with a minute ago. I want to multiply both sides by the inverse. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to enter into my calculator matrix A. This matrix over here, even though it's just a little matrix, I'm going to need to enter in this matrix B, because when I multiply an inverse times the original matrix, this turns into our equivalent of 1, so it's going to give us x, y equals something. And when I multiply my A inverse over here times B, it's going to give me the answer. So let's go through that process. I want to go back to my matrix and I want to edit it. So I want to quit this because, there we go. Let's go back into our matrix and edit it. Our matrix A is a 2 by 2 matrix. Here's our matrix A. We want to enter that one in. I want to edit it. So we're putting in 2 by 2. We're putting in 2, -3. -3. 1 and 5. 1 and 5. And just double check, make sure you've got your correct matrix in. 2, -3, 1, and 5. And then you want to add in a matrix B. So we're going to go back into taking a look at our matrices. We're going to edit, but make sure you go down when you edit to matrix B. What are the dimensions of this matrix? 2 by 1. Good. And if you can't remember whether it's 1 by 2 or 2 by 1, if you put the dimensions in, it's going to show you, so that kind of helps because you know that it's an up and down thing. So we're going to put in now our two numbers, just our 4 and our 2. So now we have our matrix A and we have our matrix B. The solution to the problem is found by taking, because you're doing A inverse on both sides, this will cancel out. Remember canceling out, like when you multiply by the reciprocal, it's the same thing. It's multiplying by the inverse. So this cancels out. over here, which is what we're putting in our calculator, is just A inverse B. So we're going to quit this, and I want to put in A inverse. So I'm going to choose my matrix A, and I'm going to hit my inverse button right here. And then I'm going to do times and matrix, and I want to choose matrix B. So A inverse B. When you put in A inverse B, we get a new matrix that's 2, 0. So our final solution matrix is X, Y, and 2, 0. I know that some of you remember last year we did something with RF. I don't want you doing it that way because we're checking this inverse skill. So you need to make sure that you at least write this work to get to this, and then X, Y equals 0 when it's done. Yes. Let me go to the error. Let me check your... Oops. I want to check this. Two, -3. You have to put in... You still have the old matrix in there. So put in the matrix, the matrix A from here. Yeah. Okay, so the X inverse button after picking A. So you have A inverse B. Did you get the right answer? Oh, okay. So A inverse, if you don't write the times, it's like number next to number, and it does times, so you're fine. So it's good. It's still multiplying it, so you're good. And it times time. Well, no, it doesn't do times. It does it either way. All right. Okay, so that's what you need to do. You can do this even for some of the really more complicated equations in 3 variables. So it's a good short way of solving an equation in 3 variables. Except you just have a 3 by 3 matrix here, and then a 3 by 1 over here. And so this is a good skill to be able to have and understand about the inverses. An inverse times its original matrix gives you that identity matrix with the 1s down the side, which is really the equivalent of just 1 times something. And so our XY comes out right here. And then that wraps up this particular thing that we're going to take care of.